Good evening, everyone. Peace and blessings to you. My name is Reverend Leah Alvarado. I'm with New Thought Northern Colorado, Center for Spiritual Living. Welcome to the season for Nonviolence. Each day we come together for a total of 64 days to practice a different principle around peace and nonviolence based on the legacy of Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King. So glad that you've joined me today. Today is day 38, and our topic is learning from our mistakes. Gandhi said, "When we see that we have gone wrong, it is our duty to retrace our footsteps and proceed again by the right path." One of the painful realities of being human is making mistakes. It's really not a question of whether we make a mistake. It's a question of what we are going to do about it when we make one. When we are able to admit that we've made a mistake, take responsibility for that mistake, and to learn from it, our mistakes can lead us down the wrong path. When we're unable to do that, when we're not willing to take responsibility, not willing to learn, not willing to admit it, it leads us down the wrong path in terms of our work and our lives and our relationships. But Gandhi is telling us that taking responsibility for our errors is not just a way to keep us on the right path, but it's also our duty. When he talks about the right path, he's talking about the path of our lives, but he's also talking about the nonviolent path specifically. When we make a mistake and we admit it, and we're willing to look at why we did it, we have returned to the nonviolent path. When we make an error and don't own it, but instead hide it, we damage all the relationships involved. When this happens, whatever goal we are seeking is further from our reach. When we admit we have gotten off track, we can then turn back to take the right path again. And only then can we enter a path of nonviolence. So I have two questions for you today in terms of the mistakes. Give you a chance to reflect on the mistakes that you've made in your life and what it was like. The first question is, what are the mistakes that you've made? And were you able to take responsibility and learn from it? So those times in your life when you were able to do that, and what was that like? What was that like for you? So I'd love to see that in the chat. If you want to type that in the chat, you know, those moments when you realized you were in error, you made a mistake, you took responsibility, you were able to look at what you learned from it, you acknowledged it, you owned it. What was it like when you did that? What was the impact on the other person that you were acknowledging this to? How did they experience it? What was their response? Versus the second question, when have you made a mistake where you didn't own it, didn't take responsibility, didn't learn from it, weren't willing to do that? And, you know, I think all of us on our journey, our spiritual journey, we have all done that at some point. We tried to hide it, push it away. We were embarrassed, we were ashamed, and we couldn't admit that we did something wrong. And so notice those moments when that has happened. Notice the contrast and how it feels, one versus the other. When you were able to take responsibility, willing to take responsibility, and those times when you haven't been. And what has been the impact to your life, your relationships, and also your spiritual path? Because these are choices that we make, and they impact us not just in that moment, but it impacts us going forward. It impacts us, certainly impacts us on the path to nonviolence. Yeah. So any comments that you want to make, I'd love to see those. Love to see those in the chat. Love to engage with you in that way. Our reflection questions, we do this every day, and I include these questions because I think it's important to stop and tune in with ourselves, check in with ourselves on these different topics. We do a different topic every day, and this is part of our growth. It's part of our learning. It's part of our expansion on this earthly plane. as spiritual beings. Let's say our affirmative practice together. This is something that will support us. Thank you, Annette. So I was so freeing. It was so freeing. I didn't know that it was weighing me down. Yeah, sometimes we don't even realize that until we actually do it. We acknowledge it. We get complete with somebody. We clear something up with someone. And it's like we can take a deep breath. Yeah, it's like, it just feels so freeing. Yeah, yeah, beautiful. Thanks for sharing that. So I'm going to put our affirmative practice there in the chat, and let's say this together. There we go. Okay. So here's our affirmative practice for today. I will meditate on my mistakes and how I've handled them. And let me just stop for a second, because sometimes the word mistake, particularly on the spiritual path, can be a trigger for people, because they don't want to look at it as I made a mistake, because it has a negative connotation to it. And so maybe there's another word that fits better for you rather than saying the word mistake. I made a mistake. Because really, truly, there's simply choices in our life and decisions we've made, and they have consequences to them. And sometimes they have positive consequences, and sometimes they have negative consequences. So I recognize, and I just want to acknowledge that sometimes the word mistake it doesn't quite sit right with some folks. So just wanted to say that. So if you're meditating on this, it's tuning into those times in your life when the consequences of your decisions perhaps didn't produce something that was pleasant or positive, because of your reactions, because you didn't take responsibility. So checking in with yourself around all of that. So let's continue. Today, I will admit when I've been wrong. Boy, that's a hard one sometimes, to just admit that, to say I'm sorry, to acknowledge something. We have to really be in a humble place to be able to do that. And sometimes we find ourselves in a righteous place. And so admitting that we're wrong is huge. I will go within to look at what I've learned. That's another important piece to this, is what have we learned from this experience? Everything is a teacher. Every experience is teaching us something. And when we can stop and look at whether we chose to take responsibility or we didn't, what did we learn? What did we learn from that experience? Such a beautiful thing. And make the amends that put me back on the right path. The right path. The path of nonviolence. The more that we do this, the more we are on that nonviolent path. The more we are at peace within ourselves, right? Which is so huge. When we can be at peace with ourselves, then we're in integrity with ourselves too. Yeah, that's a great question to ask too, is if I make this choice, if I make this decision, if I do this, take this action, am I in integrity with myself? That could be a whole other topic. Yeah. So checking in with ourselves. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, Annette. Yes, what a learning opportunity we have. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. So let's just close our eyes for a moment and just meditate on this idea, this idea of taking responsibility, of owning what we have done or not done. The times when we have done that, when we have owned it, we've admitted it, and those times when we haven't. And just breathing all around that, just sending love to all of those places within us, those moments, those memories, whether they produced a positive consequence or a negative consequence. It's all learning. It's all for our highest and best good. And so sending love to all of it. It's all part of this human journey that we're all on. And sometimes it's painful as we learn from these moments. But sometimes that's where the greatest learning comes from. And so just taking some deep breaths. And let's just move into silence for a few moments. And so gently coming back. Yeah, and these practices are for our learning and expansion, and it's never to judge ourselves for these things. It's simply to love ourselves through this journey. So I just want to make that clear that that's really what this is all about as we grow and as we learn. One of the most important things I think we can do for ourselves as spiritual beings having a human experience is to love ourselves through this process, through this journey of learning. Such an important thing. Let peace be with you. Thank you for being here. Tomorrow will be day 39, and we'll be talking about the topic of real love, what that means. Have a blessed evening. Look forward to being with you again. Namaste.